introduction that I welcome today's speaker, Marina Nemat. Marina is a longtime friend of FSWC. She is a human rights advocate and a survivor of imprisonment and torture at the hands of Iran's revolutionary regime. She is the author of two exceptional memoirs, Prisoner of Tehran and After Tehran. She is the recipient of numerous awards for her writing and human rights related work and is currently teaching at the University of Toronto's School of Continuing Studies. Before we begin, I will provide a little bit of background information about Marina's life, just for anyone who hasn't had the opportunity to read one of Marina's memoirs, and also highlight some of the incredible recognition her work has received in the field of human rights scholarship. Marina Nemat was born in 1965 in Tehran, Iran. After the Islamic Revolution of 1979, she was arrested at the age of 16 and spent more than 2 years in Evin, a political prison in Tehran, where she was tortured and came very close to execution. She came to Canada in 1991 and has called it home ever since. Her memoir of life in Iran, Prisoner of Tehran, was published in Canada in 2007. To date, the book has been published in 30 other countries and has been an international bestseller. Maclean's magazine referred to the text as one of the finest memoirs ever written by a Canadian. In 2007, Marina received the inaugural Human Dignity Award from the European Parliament, and in 2008, the Grinzane Prize in Italy. She was the recipient of the Maurice Abram Human Rights Award from UN Watch in Geneva, Switzerland in 2014, and in February 2017, she received Premio Sepio Pistoia, a prestigious award given every year in Tuscany, Italy. In 2008 and 2009, she was an ARIA Fellow at the University of Toronto's Massey College, where she wrote her second book, After Tehran, A Life Reclaimed, which was published in 2010. Marina has spoken at high schools, universities, and conferences around the world, including University of Milan, Oxford University, Yale, Tufts, Berkeley, and Stanford, just to name a few. She has served on the board of directors at the CCVT, the Canadian Centre for Victims of Torture, Vigdis, a Norwegian charitable organization that provides legal aid and other forms of assistance to female political prisoners around the world, Writers in Exile at Penn, Canada, and the International Council of the Human Rights Foundation in the US. She has a certificate in creative writing from the School of Continuing Studies at the University of Toronto. And as I said, she's currently teaching memoir writing at SCS and has been for 13 years, I believe. Marina, thank you so much for being here with us today. It is really an honor to share this space with you. So I'll join back in a little bit to moderate questions from the audience, but for now, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate it. And to everybody who has joined in, I do very much appreciate your time. So I'm going to give you a summary of what I think is important to kind of get an idea of where I come from and what my experiences are. And after that, please do think about your questions, and if there's anything you need to know, I guess the questions will be moderated and I will be happy to answer them. And if there's no time, you can always email me and I'll get back to you. So yeah, as it was said, I was born in 1965 in Tehran, Iran. And back then, unlike today, Iran was not an Islamic republic. This was a long time ago. But we had a king, we called him the Shah. Those of you who are older, maybe you remember those days. And I'm a Christian. I grew up in a Christian family. I was born in a Christian family. And Iran back then, still today, was and is 99% Muslim. And the remainder 1% were and are Baha'i, Christian, Zoroastrian, and Jewish. And growing up in Iran, when I was a little girl before the revolution, I never felt discriminated against because I was such a tiny minority. And it's hard to understand because in most of the world, tiny minorities are in one way or another discriminated against. But I never had that experience. I went to a Zoroastrian high school for girls when I was a bit older, and things were good. Things were looking up. My dad was a ballroom dancing instructor, yes, in Tehran. Back then, again, things were good. Women could wear the miniskirt. I used to wear a bikini on the beach. I had a green one with white polka dots. I don't wear bikinis anymore, but there was a time where I did. And we used to dance to the tunes of the Bee Gees and Donny and Marie Osmond. And I watched The Little House on the Prairie, dubbed into Farsi. And I watched the Donny and Marie Osmond show. I was in love with Donny Osmond. I wanted to marry him. I was so disappointed when he got married. And like any teenage girl, well, I was 13 when the revolution happened. So, I had just become a teenager when it, all hell broke loose. But by then, I loved my summers at the cottage. I loved swimming. I loved dancing. And I was just mad about boys. You think 13-year-old girl, right? So I was a very good student. I wanted to become a medical doctor, and girls were going to universities and they were becoming very educated. So for me to want to become a medical doctor, it was absolutely normal and absolutely achievable. You just needed to work hard. You need to write the exams. You need to, just be a good student. And that's what I was. So I felt like I really had a very good future. And then in 1978, the demonstrations began. We lived in downtown Tehran. So one of the main streets, if you think Toronto, like Bloor Street on Toronto, it was kind of like that. It was called Shaw Avenue. And it was the heart of downtown Toronto. So I watched, astonished from my window, because I didn't know that the Shah was a dictator. I didn't know, because I had all the freedoms I wanted as a girl. I could dance, I could sing, I could wear the miniskirt, I could wear a bikini, I could wear nail polish and makeup and party with boys. That's all I wanted. And suddenly I was told by some friends who were older than me that no, the Shah is a dictator. What's a dictator? Well, you cannot criticize the Shah. Really? Why would someone criticize the Shah? Well, because, and it went on and on. I was 13, very naive. My family were not political. We had escaped, my family had escaped the Russian communist revolution, and they just stayed out of politics. So I didn't know any of that. And I watched the street fill with demonstrators yelling slogans, being very angry, death to the Shah, death to the US, death to everybody, basically, to the left and to the right and to everybody. And slogans in support of this guy, cleric called Ayatollah Khomeini, and never heard of him. I had never heard of the man. And he just looked like a very angry guy when I saw him on TV. He was always wishing death upon everybody. And I couldn't understand the anger. I had grown up happy. I was a middle class girl. We weren't rich. Yeah, we had a cottage, but we rented in Tehran. I couldn't afford a lot of the things that I wanted. But, apparently there were a lot of grievances. I was happy, but people were not. So I watched, and it felt like everybody except religious minorities were supporting the Ayatollah. I mean, religious minorities were naturally suspicious because he was saying he wanted an Islamic republic. And when you're a Christian or a Jew or Zoroastrian or Baha'i and somebody says Islamic republic, you're going to say, how am I going to fit in that one? So the revolution succeeded, long story short, as we all know, in 1979, February 1979. I was 13, and the schools had been shut down for about 2-3 months. There was too much violence on the streets. But now things calmed down, new government, new system. They opened the schools. They said, go to school. We did. It all looked the same at the beginning. We had a lot to catch up. We were excited to see our friends. There was no Facebook, so we hadn't seen each other or really communicated for a while. And this was a brand new world. At the beginning, it was actually quite good because there was so much information. Again, today information is at your fingertips, but back then it wasn't. So a lot of the books that had been illegal during the time of the Shah now were legal. Now, of course, the books I read were always legal. Jane Austen was always legal. But Marx, Lenin, leftist books, for example, were illegal. And I didn't know who Marx and Lenin were, even though my background was Russian. But my parents never talked about it because that was a no, we don't talk about that stuff subject. So now it was everywhere. And all the smarter kids, all the cool kids were reading Marx and Lenin and discussing. And I was 13. These were like 17, 18-year-olds, the grade 11s and 12s. And everybody was so curious. People were talking about freedom and democracy and possibility. I mean, there has never been a revolution in the history of mankind where they promised a dictatorship. The Russian Revolution promised freedom. The Chinese Revolution promised freedom. Revolutions do that, but that's not necessarily where they lead. So people had a lot of goodwill. They believed the Ayatollah, they believed his promises. He never said he was going to limit women and take their rights away. He had never said that. But now we are in school, and one by one, our teachers get fired. They're forced into retirement. And instead of our great teachers, we get 19, 20-year-old members of the Revolutionary Guard, female. This was a girls' school. And they come to class, and instead of teaching literature or physics or chemistry or algebra, they would talk about Islamic rules and all the great things Khomeini has done and will do for the country. And at the beginning, it was just annoying, But then imagine you're 13 years old, you have grown up with Donny Osmond and Little House on the Prairie and Jane Austen, and somebody is feeding you religious propaganda from 8:30 a.m. to 3 p.m. You're 13. And you get fed up. And you're 13, so you don't have any filters. So one day, this Revolutionary Guard teacher, she wore the complete Islamic hijab, and she was a very angry person, and she just kept going, propaganda, stuff. I don't even remember what she said because it was nonsense to me. So I raised my hand and I said, ma'am, this is actually, it was calculus. This is a calculus class, and I would like to learn from you. So can you please teach the subject? And she looked at me angry and she said, you don't like what I teach, leave. All eyes in the classroom were on me. You're 13. All your friends are looking at you. You just challenged the teacher. What are you going to do? You're going to walk out. So I walked out. And I was not that kind of person to cause any trouble in school, but here I was. And to my astonishment, I think there were like 50 students in the class, 45 of them followed. And we were standing in the hallway and everybody said, oh, crap, what do we do now? And we all said, nah, let's just go to the yard, eat something and just chill. So we did. And then everybody, all the other classes found out what we had done, and we had a school-wide strike. Who's the leader of the strike? Marina. It was as ridiculous as it sounds. And 3 days later, the principal, who was also now a member of the Revolutionary Guards, like 20-year-old, she called me and two others who had been chosen as representatives to the office. She said, listen, go back to class or I will call the Revolutionary Guard. They will arrest all of you. Understood. We knew she meant it. There had been arrests and, word travels. So we said, okay, we'll go back to class. But of course, nothing had changed, right? So propaganda remained. And then in spring of 1981, the mass arrests began. Of course, we had had a few months of relative freedom. So the government had had enough time to watch and make sure they knew who was friend and who was foe. So we were foe, for sure. So I stopped going to school in fall of 1981 because I was just so depressed. I was in deep depression. I couldn't tolerate the situation. So I stopped going. But then every day the phone would ring and my friends would say, so and so was arrested, so and so was arrested, so and so was arrested. So then they came for me in January 1982. I was home about to take a bath. The doorbell rang and it was like 9:30 at night. My mom called my name. I opened the bathroom door and there were two guards armed, big guns pointed in my face. And something strange happened that night. I I entered a state of shock. I was not afraid at all. And this is not because I'm not the scaredy type of person. I actually am. I'm terrified of cockroaches, for example. I say cockroach, I'm going to scream and run in the opposite direction. But this was so big that it just didn't fit in my, if I was 16, in my 16-year-old brain. So I just froze and didn't feel anything. This is state of shock protects you against what basically your nervous system cannot absorb. So they put me in a car, they drove me to Evin prison, and which is still today 100% operational. They took me and they interrogated me. And you get blindfolded when you enter Evin prison. And just being blindfolded, like not being able to see anything, is intimidating. So I couldn't even see my interrogator, this man, and he was throwing questions at me like, are you a communist? No, I'm not a communist. My family escaped communism. Why would I be a communist? No, I'm not communist. I like Donny Osmond. And he kept asking me about my classmates and about people I knew, people I had met. And he was trying to tie me to some communist organization. And he was trying to say that I had done stuff against the government. Well, I kind of had done stuff against the government. I mean, I had ran a strike against the government, but that was nothing, right? Well, apparently he was very upset about it. And the principal had reported me and a whole bunch of other kids to the courts of Islamic justice or Islamic injustice. But and here we were. So they were just trying to make sure that they could tie as many things to us that were considered anti-God as they could. So long story short, I don't want to get into a whole lot of detail, but usually when you're under interrogation, if in prison, they never believe you. So whatever I said, they just assumed and they told me that I was definitely lying. So when you're under interrogation in Evin prison, you are going to be tortured because it doesn't matter what you say. It doesn't matter if you say the truth or if you lie, you are going to get tortured. It's just a part of the deal. So they took me in a room, they tied me to a bare wooden bed. I was lying down on my stomach and they lashed the soles of my bare feet with a length of cable. And when I say cable, I don't mean wire, I mean cable, heavy rubber, about 1 inch thick. Think garden hose, but it's like it's not, it doesn't have a hole in it. It's like heavy, complete rubber. And these men, they do this for a living. So they mean to inflict as much pain on you as you can imagine. Our nerve ends are in our feet. The soles of your feet are very sensitive. This is why they actually massage your feet when, I don't know, you have a headache. So the pain was something I cannot even begin to describe. I have broken bones. I have broken a lot of bones. I just do that. And it was on a different level. I would break 100 bones before experiencing that ever again. It reduced me to something I didn't recognize. Because up to that point, again, I was a 16-year-old who had ideals, and when you're being beaten up like that, tied up, ideals don't exist. Nothing does. All that matters is to stop the pain. So this is why people lie under torture. I mean, you're going to tell your interrogator whatever they want to hear. Are you a communist? Yes, absolutely. I'm the most communist of the communists ever, 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 ever. Of course I'm a communist. So are you an enemy of God? Absolutely. I'm totally an enemy of God, whatever you say. So you basically confess to whatever you feel your interrogator wants you to confess to. So that's what I did. And again, long story short, they tried me, but I wasn't present in my own trial. So it was an absentia. They gave me a death sentence. And back then in 1982, I think at least half of the people who entered Evin prison, if not more, got a death sentence. And it had nothing to do with truth. It had nothing to do with anything. It had nothing to do with how old you were. A friend of mine who'd been arrested, her name was Shahnush Behzadi. She was arrested before me. She was 15. She was a Zoroastrian, and she was the sweetest girl I had ever known. Like, there wasn't an evil bone in that body, ever. She was so sweet. She was just ridiculous. And she was arrested a few months before me. And by the time I ended up in Evin prison, she had been executed. And I looked for her. When I was sent to the cell block. I looked for her. I asked the people, Shahnush, have you seen her? Does anybody know? And then people told me, yeah, we saw her, but she was executed. So sorry about that. So yeah, I got a death sentence. And it was eventually reduced to life in prison because one of the guards, one of my interrogators, Ali, in Evin prison, he decided he wanted to marry me. And he wanted me to convert to Islam and become his wife. Again, I was 16 and I was a prisoner. So he threatened that if I didn't, he would arrest my boyfriend, Andre, and my parents. And I knew he was not kidding because they did that. So I said, fine, I'll do it. Just don't touch my family. So basically, I became by force his wife. He was basically raping me over and over again. And there was nothing I could do about it. So again, a very long story short, I got to meet his family because after all, I was their daughter-in-law. And here is a man who was the embodiment of evil. He was doing things to me that caused me the kind of trauma and pain that I still have difficulty thinking about, talking about, writing about. It's certainly not a walk in the park. So much darkness there. But he took me to visit his family. And I expected them to be like the evil, his mother to be the evil stepmother from Cinderella and just torment me more. And this woman was this small woman, and she was the kindest I had ever met. She took me in her kitchen. She said, you're thin and, you need to eat. And she was kind and she was generous. She never said a wrong word to me. She never raised her voice. She was just kind, just generous, just warm. She was so much nicer than my mother. And I was shocked. And the father, his father, Ali's father, was the nicest guy I had ever met. So considerate. Always asking me for my opinion and, saying stuff that were nice. And I was looking at these people and I was thinking, wait a second. What is wrong with you? Your son is a torturer in Evin prison. How do you put that on your resume? This is crazy. Why are you nice? And I had time to think about it because I actually, at the time, I wasn't released or anything. I spent most of my time in Evin prison and most of it in solitary confinement. And I thought about it. And I realized that evil is not as clearly visible and definable as we might think. Our next door neighbor might seem very, very nice and very, very normal, but are they? And that's the thing. And then this mother talked to me. She talked a lot. And she told me that her son, Ali, my husband, had been a political prisoner in Evin prison during the time of the Shah, and he had been tortured for 3 years. My house of cards collapsed. Up to that point, being 16, having read fairy tales, I divided the world into good and evil. He was evil, I was good, period. But wait a second. If he had been a political prisoner, he had been good. What happened? And then I thought about it. Well, it's obvious. The revolution happened. And the victim was given a length of cable and a gun. And the victim was angry. And the victim was full of hate. And the victim was self-righteous. So Ali, he said, tables have turned, my turn. And he went after the so-called enemies of God, the so-called enemies of the people, the so-called enemies of the Islamic Republic. And who was that? Me and my friends. So then I thought some more about it. Again, solitary confinement, very good for thinking. I thought, well, let's imagine, I have a great imagination. One day, tables will turn. The Islamic Republic will fall. Everything falls. And someone will call me from Iran, hopefully by then I thought, oh, I might go to Canada and where my brother is. And that's a nice place. And, maybe someone will call me from Iran and say, hey, Marina, come back home. The Islamic Republic has fallen and you can come and get revenge on the people who killed your friends and tortured you. Come on home. And they would hand me a length of cable and a gun. And they would say, go for it. And this is when I thought, uh-oh, this is the problem, isn't it? Tables turn throughout history. They always have. It's a wheel that turns. The victim becomes the torturer, the victim, the torturer. We don't even know anymore who's who, where, what's up, what's down. I made one decision back then in solitary confinement, and I'm glad that I have still been able to hang on to that I will not take that length of cable. I will not take that gun. I will not seek revenge, because revenge and justice are very different from one another. Very different. They're mistaken with each other all the time, but no, I'm not doing that, because I have seen revenge and I know its ugliness with my soul. Not going to happen, not on my watch. So this man who forced me to marry him and tormented me, he was assassinated by a rival faction of the government. It was 15 months after I married him. He was gunned down. And the prosecutor of Tehran, his name was Asadullah Javardi, he wanted to marry me off to another guard. Ali's family, his mom and dad, remember I told you they were nice people. They said no. They said, she's our daughter. Our son has died. She's going home to her parents. It took them 6 months, and they were friends with Ayatollah Khomeini. So, but still, it took them 6 months. That after his death, finally, after 6 months, they opened the gate of the prison and they told me, go home. I went home. I was just shy of 19. Went home, took a shower, got into clean clothes, sat at the dinner table with my parents after 2 years, 2 months, and 12 days in prison. And 2 years, 2 months, 12 days in the life of a 16-year-old is a long time. Well, 19 by then. I sat at the dinner table with them. It was March. It was Iranian New Year, just after spring equinox. I think it was March 26th. And just a few days after the equinox. And my parents talked about the weather. It had rained a lot that spring and the roses were doing really well. And I looked at this fool. Up to that point, I thought, I'm going to go home and everything is going to be well. Everything is going to be great. This nightmare will end and I'll just go back to my life. I'll go live my life. And I looked at these people and I thought, who are you? The weather? I mean, if I had gone on vacation to Cuba, somebody would have said, hey, how did it go? But no one said, hey, you probably had a tough time in the past 2 years. Well, probably you're not you're not ready to talk about it, but when you are, let's talk. No, because some nightmares are so big that we don't know where to start. They're scary, so we don't want to talk about them. And if we acknowledge the nightmare, that the nightmare is not a nightmare, it's real, somebody will come and say, hey, if you knew it was real, if you knew that horrible things are being done to people, why didn't you say something? And nobody wants to hear that. Nobody wants a finger being pointed at them and say, how could you stand by and watch all of this happen? Well, the message from my family was move on. The Islamic Republic was still in power. Nobody else wants to go to prison. I certainly didn't. And we moved on. And it took me years and years later, when I finally came to Canada, I didn't have any symptoms of any kind of mental illness. None. I looked normal. I thought I was normal. The truth of it is I wasn't, but I was in an emotional coma. So I was not showing any symptoms of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, nothing. I was a mother, I was married, I had 2 kids. Canada, my neighbors loved me, I had a job, my boss loved me, and I looked absolutely normal. Until one day, just out of the blue, it hit. Because the past, I find, when it's so traumatic, is like a rubber band tied around your very heavy duty rubber band tied around your waist. And you run from the past, but it's around your waist. And then at some point, the resistance, you can't hold it anymore. And it will pull you back and you hit the wall behind you, the wall of what happened. And that is when I started showing symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. And I still do. The funny thing is, this damn thing, it never goes away, but the beauty of it is that you learn to manage it. I always say it's like a backpack filled with rocks. It's glued to your back. You can never put it down. I first had the illusion that I can one day put it down. One day it will go away, the past. If I give enough talks, if I write enough books, if I do enough, if I volunteer enough, if I don't know, do all these things, it will stop hurting me. It will go away. I'll be normal. I'll just go get a dog and be normal. I always talk to people with dogs are normal, not really. I've had 2 dogs since. So no, I'm not normal. And the thing, it boils down to management. And allow me just as a closing thing, because this is something that has been bothering me recently, and I haven't talked about it, and it's like a noose around my neck. So I find it in this day and age, in 2024, is astounding. And it bothers me and angers me immensely. We talk about mental illness. And in Canada, we seem, emphasis on the word seem, to value the suffering of people who suffer from various forms of it. And now post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, anxiety, these are just a few. And yet, I have hit walls, very thick ones, not the one of memories that, I keep hitting, but, in the surrounding world, how, even in Canada, how, I'm not saying everywhere, but in a lot of places, there is so little understanding and appreciation of people who suffer from mental illness. And like I have very specific stories. I don't want to name any names, and I don't want to shame any specific organization or any specific company or anything like that. I could, but I'm not going to do that. But in general, let me allow me to say generally that we need to change the way we deal with mental illness, because my parents dealt with it really badly. They pushed me very close to suicide. They did. Not knowingly. My parents loved me. They were good people, but they didn't know. But today, I have much higher expectations of people, of companies, of organizations here in Canada and in the West, in the free world in general. Let's be more sensitive. Let's be more open to hearing out what a big problem this is and how we can actually help people. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And I'm sure you have a lot of questions about Iran and, you know, what's going on. But let me tell you just in a very general terms that it is as hellish, if not worse. The dictatorship remains. It is stronger than it's ever been. Yes, the President Raisi died. Yay. But you know, I talked to my brother recently and I said, don't cheer too much because there's more where that came from. There are a lot more Raisis, you know, waiting in the wings to join the madness of these murderers, terrorists, you know, just call them what you will, but they're scary. And why aren't the people of Iran rising and getting rid of them? Well, because they have massacred and tortured us for the, you know, since 1979. So that kind of, you know, takes care of all the courage you have and basically pushes you in the dark corners of PTSD and God knows what else. I mean, we will be as good as any other people. It's just that we are basically hostages of our own government.
Okay.
Thank you.
Got it.
So thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, and any question will be welcome.
Thank you so much, Marina. That was, you know, really profound to hear you speak. And I'm still thinking about, you know, that metaphor you used with the rubber band around the waist and pulling back and hitting that wall. And I think that something we've heard is a recurring theme with a lot of the speakers that we've featured in the program, that you know, that trauma, it manifests in different ways at different moments, but it will catch up with you eventually. So I do see one question so far, and yeah, please feel free, everybody, if you do have questions, to put them in the chat now. One question is, was there a particular moment when you were triggered, you know, kind of have to reflect on the past? Was there something specific that you were comfortable sharing? Of course, if you're not, that's okay.
Oh no, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have written 2 books. So I mean, if you know, everything is on the table. Yes, there was a moment. There was a very specific trigger. So my mother got cancer and she died. My mother and I, this was in Canada. So this was in year 2000, 24 years ago. My mother, it was in March 15th, my mother died. She had cancer, and my mother and I, we never really got along, but you know, I did the best for them. And so my parents lived with me for a while when they came to Canada. And my father, they had been married more than 50 years. My father was very distraught when mom died. And we were at my brother's house here, well, not here, but in the GTA. And my father was very upset about her death, of course, and he was crying, and, you know, right after the funeral. So we go to my brother's house. And then I sat next to my father to, you know, hold his hand and, you know, all of that. And then he looked at me and just, I guess out of despair, he said the truth. He said, Marina, your mother forgave you before she died. And I was like, in my head, of course, I didn't say it out loud. I was like, in my head, I did the calculations. I was like, forgive me? For what? I mean, okay, we had disagreements. No, he didn't mean that. He meant, you stupid girl, you did stuff in school, you got arrested, and we all suffered. We forgive you. I was like, and suddenly it was like everything in me was unleashed. It was terrifying. I had never felt like, for years, I was in an emotional coma. Like, this is 2000. I was released in 85. So here we are 15 years later. I had not done anything, like I hadn't really felt much in 15 years. And what I felt was anger. This red hot, all consuming, like from the depths of hell, anger that just jumped inside me and just was trying to get out. And I opened my mouth, and what came out was a blood-curdling scream. And I tried to stop screaming, and it kept going and going and going, and I couldn't shut up. And then I couldn't breathe. And I was trying to tell people, call 911. I can't breathe because I'm screaming and I can't stop the scream. And I collapsed. And a friend of mine is a doctor. She was there. She came over me. She started slapping me and she said, calm down, calm down, calm down. And then my husband, wonderful guy, Andre, my boyfriend, I married him. He put me in the car. We had 2 kids and drove me home. And no one said, what was that? No one called to say, Marina, that was weird. Are you okay? Nothing. Again, people were scared. People were scared of acknowledging that there was something wrong, of acknowledging that they need to do something about it. You know, so yeah, that was the moment, that was the trigger. And it just took from there. It just became this massive thing that I had difficulty controlling. And of course, I got a lot of help eventually. You know, Dr. Donald Payne, I don't know where he is right now, but he was instrumental in helping me understand what my problem was. And the fact that I can probably never get rid of it. And I have to make peace with that. And I just simply have to find how to manage and just manage it.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. And I think that's, it's the difficulty of people who are still living under that, I guess the oppressive regime and the mindset that comes with that, that just to acknowledge your experiences were that's too much almost, which yeah, it's difficult to process, I guess. I'm thinking we got a lot of other amazing comments and questions here. So Judy C just wanted to say that Marina is one of the best people I have ever known. And then Arnold asked, would you go back to Iran if democracy ever returned there?
I don't know. I don't know. It's hard to say. I cannot predict that. I remember because I went to Poland and to Auschwitz with Max Eisen, God rest his soul. Max was a dear friend, and uh, I walked with Max, and I contemplated while I was there. I thought, Max is so brave. If one day they open up Evin prison and it becomes like a museum, like Auschwitz is, I don't think I can go back. I'll probably pass. I don't know. But that's the thing, right? Because my friends were killed. There are mass graves there. I mean, don't they deserve my standing? Okay, yes, they do. But will I be able to push myself? I don't know. I really don't know. Like Max, when we were in Majdaneki, there was this huge area filled with ashes, and Max wanted me to read this prayer. So I said, okay, I'll read the prayer. So he hands me the prayer, and I stand there, and I just cried my eyes. I couldn't utter one word. And then Max held my hand, and he said, pass it to me. So I passed it to him, and he read it himself. I was like, oh, I'm terrible. I'm just awful. And then Max said, don't be cruel to yourself, and you will find it when you really need it. So, I trust that he was right, that maybe when the time comes, if it ever does, which it might not, this dictatorship has been going on since 1979. Well, my grandmother died before the communist regime in Russia collapsed. I mean, it's not a democracy, but still, at least communism, the way we knew it, collapsed. But what do I know? I don't know.
Well, that's a very, I think, a very reasoned answer. So only the future can tell, I guess. So another question, just do you have any response in terms of the world's reaction? What do you think about the world's reaction to Raisi's death? Is
I mean, I don't make much of his death. Like,
Mm,
to me, he's just another pawn, another cartoon. Well, very evil, but cartoon like this character, this baseless, two-dimensional character. I mean, there are just so many of them. And I mean, I value human life in general, and I would never, never wish death. I never have. I have never. This is something I'm proud of, I suppose, that I have never wished death upon anybody. I have prayed for people to be put, those who have made me suffer and made millions of others suffer, to be put in a situation where they would learn a thing or two about the pain they have caused. Not that I want them to suffer or have pain. I would never inflict it on them, but I just, God Almighty, if there is a way to teach them a lesson, to make them feel the pain, like even if just a molecule of it that they have caused, I would be grateful. So I would say don't put too much thought into Raisi, and who knows what happened. And again, there's more where that came from.
yeah, I think that's a fair statement that only, and again, time will tell, but yeah, there's more where that came from. Okay. And we've got another great question. So I'll go back to a sec for a moment. I'll just go back to maybe the question of, as a 16-year-old or even younger, do you think there's a reason that you did choose to be outspoken, or was it really even a choice? Is that something, how do you think that came, because your parents, as you said, were not political?
No, you have to realize what I did was not political at all.
Mm-hmm.
What I did was a knee-jerk reaction of at the time when I did that, I was about 14 and a
Right.
half. Was the knee-jerk reaction of a Donny Osmond loving 14-year-old girl who just wanted to wear the miniskirt and dance to the Bee Gees. There was nothing political about it. And this was, anything I did in school, any teacher that I stood up to, anything that I challenged. I attended protest rallies against the government, against the Iranian government. Many of them were attacked by the Revolutionary Guard, but there was nothing political, really. Like, I attended protest rallies organized by various political groups. I didn't care what their ideology was. I was curious about all of them. I wanted to learn more about them, to get to understand. But the engine driving me was not politics, was not ideology. It was, I want to party, I want to dance, I want to live my life at my own terms. Don't tell me what to do. And that's just a teenager. Don't tell me what to do. I'm going to tell you what to do, I guess. I was your typical teenage girl.
Understandable. And I think that's I think a good reminder that, especially, the motivations of people who were against the regime, they, it's not all about one thing necessarily, and especially for young people, it's not always even something that thought out as a clear ideology. Um, Another comment here. So thank you for sharing, the story in such a personal and meaningful way. So impactful for me to hear the story and the emotions, um, from someone who has reflected a lot, um, and recovered to whatever extent possible, I guess. So the question that they have is, did any of your awful experiences affect your faith in Christianity?
Um, I have always been a very unconventional Christian. I think my belief system, my spirituality is very much affected by the ancient Persian mystics.
Hmm.
So you know, yeah, I attended church. I mean, some of my friends in Iran, they thought I was going to become a nun. So that was not because like I went to mass every day. But that was after the revolution. It was because I had nowhere else to go. So I went to church. It was a place where I felt more like myself, where I felt some freedom, where I felt, I could get together with the other, boys and girls in the community and, all of that. It wasn't so much about Christianity as an ideology, as an organized religion. It was, for me, it was a community. When you're such a minority in a country like Iran, your community is everything. So you just hang on to it. And that was what church was for me. It was a community. I just hung out with other young, like I met my boyfriend there, Andre, at the time, and he was the organist. I was in the choir. It was a social thing. And then we ended up getting married. So that's where you went to meet other young people and to get married eventually. So that's exactly what I did. It wasn't that in prison, I find that I think all of us, not just me, but my other friends, that whether they were Muslim or Baha'i or Jewish, whatever they were, I think we all fell back upon our relationship with God. I think when you're in a place like that, that you are so so alone, so forsaken, so abandoned, you need to have a relationship with something higher. And this, I wouldn't call it religion. This is on a mystic level. It is different. I find that when you're in such a desperate space, in the bottom of darkness, that the world has produced, you just have no option but to reach out outside of the world, because the world as you have known it is darkness and there's nothing else. So you need to reach out for light. And this light, I guess, many of us, we call it God. Now, whether God in whatever religion, but it doesn't matter. And to me, even today, my relationship with God is very much on a mystic level. I believe there's a higher power than I can understand. And I have a lot of admiration for this power and for the beauty that it has created, but has also given us free will. So the rest of it is the side effect. I think all the darkness we see in the world is the evil that we human beings produce is the side effect of our free will, because we are allowed to choose to do evil. And if we choose it, we can't go and blame God for it. So I wish God had kept more control, but hey, then that would destroy free will. So I would love to one day have a conversation with God. That would be fun.
Wow. Absolutely. And the we're getting into the deep philosophical questions of the universe now, I think. So maybe that's a good place for us to end the conversation today. And I just want to say again, thank you so much. I know there's tons of thank yous coming in from the audience, but on behalf of everyone at FSWC and everyone watching, just thank you so much for sharing your memories and your wisdom with us, Marina. And thank you everyone for joining us for another really meaningful program. And we hope to see you again next time.
Thank you so, so much for having me, guys, and have a great afternoon and evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.